Hey folks, welcome to our first lesson in the reproduction unit. What we're going to start with in this unit, super cool unit in terms of, I should preface this, very cool unit in terms of looking specifically at hormone regulation. It is absolutely incredible how much hormone regulation is happening both in male and female reproductive systems. We're going to start with the male reproductive system in this first lesson. It is quite simple compared to the female system. I think even the females in this class might not have an idea just how complicated and how much is going on in the female reproductive system. And then to think about the two systems kind of getting together to work out to, I guess, create life. It's absolutely amazing. Very, very neat unit for both males and females, just to see how much is going on in our body with reproduction. So we're going to start out with the simpler of the two. Females are like, yeah, I know males are simpletons, right? They're just simpletons. Well, turns out our reproductive system is a simpler version of the females as well. In this unit, you have to sort of ready yourself. You guys are mature individuals. But you do have to ready yourself for a discussion about penises and vaginas, right? So I'm just going to go out there and get those words out of the way, and you can get your giggles out. But it really is kind of like the sex ed piece with some biology wrapped in there. Anyway, you guys will enjoy it. It's pretty neat stuff. Lots going on in both the male and female system. So the male reproductive system. Here is sort of the outline for this video. So we're going to talk about sperm and the pathway that sperm takes from where it's created to where it's ejaculated, where it leaves the body. We're going to talk about the function of the seminal fluid or the semen. There are some fluids that are added to help that sperm function like it should. And then we'll talk about hormone regulation and testosterone sort of in the latter half of this video. But just to give you an idea where we're going, those are the three big ideas for the next sort of 20-ish minutes or so. So before we talk about the pathway sperm takes and its creation, we should probably talk about sperm itself. We know that sperm is the reproductive cell of males. So you may remember that to make reproductive cells in both males and females, the body undergoes a process called meiosis, where we take the full complement of chromosomes and we cut it in half. So sperm get half the number of chromosomes, the female egg gets half the number of chromosomes, so 23 each. And then when they fuse, they're going to make 46, the full complement of chromosomes, and that creates life. So in terms of the sperm itself, there are sort of three parts that make up every individual sperm. And we're talking like millions and millions and millions and millions of sperm made every day. Maybe I'll just throw the number out there right now. The male body produces 1,500 sperm per second. Let that number sink in. That's crazy. So that the testicles of a male are just these like ridiculous sperm making factories, right? 1,500 a second. It's ridiculous. So there's millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, probably, of sperm in an ejaculation. It's crazy. And one of them is going to be the winner, right? One of them was the winner that made you. One of them was the winner that made me. It's amazing to think that. But there's lots and lots of these things in the male body. Each individual sperm is composed of a head, which is this little section right here. So the head contains the nucleus, which I already mentioned contains 23 chromosomes, half of the regular number in all of our other cells. And that's because a process called meiosis has occurred to cut that number in half, because the egg will make up the other 23 chromosomes. And it also contains this outer layer of something called the acrosome. The acrosome is kind of cool. It contains special enzymes that help that sperm penetrate the egg if it reaches there. So it helps break through the egg. Female eggs have sort of a tough resistant shell, and there are special enzymes that will help a special chemical reaction occur that will allow the acrosome and this sperm to actually embed those 23 chromosomes into the egg. So the winning sperm, when it arrives to the egg first, that acrosome helps it sort of open the door, if you will, and actually get into the egg. There is then the mid piece, which is right here in the diagram, this sort of coiled section, and it's really just full of mitochondria. And those mitochondria are producing lots of energy. Remember, we know mitochondria is cellular respiration, producing ATP. And that's going to help that little tail spin, 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 so this thing can swim. Because remember, these sperm, I guess they don't really want anything, they're just sperm. But they want to be the winning sperm, right? The goal of these things is to have that little tail move so that they can be the first one of the egg and they can actually be the winning sperm. So we've got lots of ATP production and lots of mitochondria in that mid piece to help that little tail go. And then the tail itself, which is obviously this section, is just the thing used for movement, right? For propulsion. That should be pretty straightforward. So that is the actual structure of sperm itself. Now let's talk about making sperm and how it leaves the body. So sperm is made in the testes, right? The testicle. So there's the term there. Testi is singular for testicles. Actually, I guess testicle would be singular. Sorry, and testes is the plural. So if you were to look inside of a testicle, there are these coiled up tubes called seminiferous tubules. And they are, this is kind of a crazy stat too, 250 meters long per testicle. I want you to think about that. You've got like this really thin, almost think about it like a spaghetti noodle. That's 250 meters long, a quarter of a kilometer. That's more than halfway around the track at Penn High. And that is coiled up, right, super coiled into the actual testicle itself. Why would you want to have such a long length of seminiferous tubules? Well, you want lots of surface area to make lots of sperm. And that's how we being males, are making 1,500-ish per second, right? We've got this huge surface area, these massively long seminiferous tubules cranking out all these sperm at any given moment. The scrotum is the pouch of skin, the sac of skin that encloses the testes. We quite often would look at the scrotum and say that's a testicle, but the testicle is actually contained inside the scrotum. And the function of the scrotum is temperature regulation. It turns out that sperm production, which you'll sometimes see called spermatogenesis, right? The genesis, the creation of sperm, it actually happens best at temperatures slightly lower than what our internal temperature is, which is about 37 degrees. And so what happens with the scrotum is when you're hot, the scrotum will extend and allow the testicle to move away from the body. And that way we can have a cooler temperature and it can be optimal for sperm production. And if it's the middle of winter and you're cold and we actually want to warm up the testicle, then the scrotum will sort of shrink just with some muscle contraction. And it will bring the testicle closer to the body to, again, keep it at that optimal temperature, which is a few degrees cooler than internal body temperature. So sperm, once it's produced in the seminiferous tubules, these structures here, all 250 meters of those, they actually have to mature for a while. And they get stored. And the storage in the epididymis is the structure. It's right in behind the testicle. If you were to sort of look at a testicle, it would probably all look like one piece, although the epididymis is a separate structure in behind. That sperm will go there to mature for several weeks, and it's stored there. The whole process from sort of start to finish for most sperm is about 64 days before it's ready to go. So it's definitely going to spend some time in the epididymis maturing and getting ready for potential fertilization. So seminiferous tubules making those sperm, They then go into this little structure in behind, the epididymis, where they're matured and they get stored up until an ejaculation occurs. In order to sort of reach the penis itself and leave the body, during an ejaculation, there is a tube called the vas deferens, and that's the tube that will carry sperm out, again, just during ejaculation. For any males, if you've heard of, and we'll chat about this later, different sort of birth control methods, for males, one of the permanent versions is called a vasectomy, which is, vasectomy comes from its VAS, severing the vas deferens. So during a vasectomy, in order to prevent males from having functional sperm leaving the body, they actually snip out a little piece of the vas deferens, and that way sperm can't actually make it away from the epididymis anymore. You can still have ejaculation, but there's no sperm in there. They end up in the vas deferens, and then they just get recycled by your body. And that's what happens to sperm that's in the epididymis and in the seminiferous tubules as well. If it's not ejaculated, it just breaks down and your body just recycles all the bits and pieces again. Just like lots of things in your body, right? Breaking, like red blood cells in your liver, break them down and recycle them back into new red blood cells. Now, so we've talked about producing sperm in the testes, storing it in the epididymis. Now, during an ejaculation, they're going to start to move through this tube called the vas deferens. The sperm needs some help. They need some other chemicals and some other substances to help them along their way to be functional sperm. And there are 3 glands that are going to add some fluid to make up semen. So semen is the mix of 3 kinds of fluid from 3 different glands plus sperm from the testes. And those 3 accessory glands are the seminal vesicles. We'll look at these in more detail in the next slide. The prostate gland, that's a really common one for guys to know because prostate glands quite often can become cancerous. That's something that we all need to get checked for as we age, males I mean. And then the Cowper's glands. I typically like to go with the name Cowper's glands, although just to put it out there, some people call these the bulbourethral glands. But that's a bit of a mouthful and it's kind of hard to say, so I like to just call them Cowper's glands. So those 3 glands are all going to add some fluid to the sperm to make up semen. And in the next slide, we'll look at sort of what different substances each of those glands adds. Before we do that, actually, I'll come back to this. So that seminal fluid, those three glands, what are they adding? So there are 2 seminal vesicles that make up most of the fluid, most of semen. So 70-ish% of semen is just the fluid produced by the seminal vesicles. It's alkaline, which means basic. And the reason that it's slightly basic is because the vagina is acidic. And sperm aren't going to want to be in that acidic environment. They want to be about neutral. So there's a slightly alkaline fluid that's released by the seminal vesicles, which neutralizes that acidic vaginal tract. There's also fructose and citrate. You may recognize something like fructose that looks a lot like glucose, right? Which is sugar. And what do we use sugar for in the human body? Well, that's for energy. So I should probably add that in here. The fructose and the citrate, that's used for energy. Remember we talked about the mid-piece having all those mitochondria. Well, the mitochondria need some kind of sugar source to produce the ATP. So the fructose and the citrate give that sperm some energy to help them swim through into the female system. And then there's also prostaglandins. Their function, you don't really need to worry about those. Their function in semen is actually relatively unknown. It sounds like, from when I looked online, that it somehow helps the sperm to actually travel through the female reproductive system to go from the vagina into the uterus, which is where sperm usually meets the egg. There is a singular prostate gland. So there were 2 seminal vesicles adding lots of fluid. There is just 1 prostate gland. It also produces an alkaline fluid to help neutralize the acidic vagina. So you can see that that's a big issue for sperm, right? They don't want to be in an acidic environment. So both of these structures are helping neutralize that acidic environment. And the prostate gland, the other big thing that it is going to add to the semen is zinc. And the zinc helps maintain the stability of the DNA in the sperm. And that's really, really important, right? We want that DNA to be completely functional so that we don't end up with either a non-functional fertilized egg or some kind of handicap or retardation down the road, right? There are issues, and I'm not trying to be offensive when I use those terms. There are certain things that can happen when DNA is damaged that can result in things like Down syndrome, right? Which is some incorrect cell division. So the zinc is going to help maintain healthy sperm so that you can help maintain a healthy fetus, right? A healthy little baby. There's also a little bit of citric acid. I'm putting that in there because it is in the prostate gland, but don't worry about it. I want you to think alkaline fluid and zinc for your prostate gland, and think alkaline fluid and then the fructose and citrate, the energy source for your seminal vesicles. And then there's also these 2 Cowper's glands. They have a slightly different job, still neutralizing though. Like, look at how important that is, right? 3 times. The Cowper's gland is actually a pre-ejaculate, so it's actually released before the sperm gets there, and it neutralizes not necessarily the female reproductive system. It's not neutralizing the vagina. It is neutralizing any leftover urine in the urethra of the penis. So urine itself is slightly acidic, and we, again, do not want that sperm in any kind of acidic environment. So it is that alkaline fluid, but it's to neutralize the urethra. So you do need to know those 3 glands and then the check marks there. What are they producing and sort of why are they producing it? So let me scroll back here because I had skipped ahead. So we had said sperm flows past those 3 glands, right? As it's making its trip through the vas deferens. You can see the seminal vesicles are going to add some fluid. The prostate gland is going to add some fluid. The Cowper's glands are going to add some fluid. That then makes up semen, which flows into the urethra, which is the tube sort of running through the penis and out of the body, and then it leaves. Now, I don't really have anything about the penis itself in this this PowerPoint because it's incredibly unimportant. It is literally just like the delivery system, right? It's just a structure that helps deliver the sperm into the vagina. So its role, people sort of talk about penises and guys tend to draw them on things when they're younger all the time and everybody giggles at the word penis. It is like totally unimportant, really, in terms of reproduction. It's all about testicles, an epididymis, and vas deferens, and those 3 glands, and then getting the sperm into the female vagina, and then from there it goes to the uterus. We'll see the female system, but the penis is really nothing very exciting at all. Sorry, guys. So there's the path of sperm. You can sort of look at that semi-fuzzy picture and follow that path. So testicle, epididymis, vas deferens, seminal vesicle, prostate, bulbourethral, aka Cowper's glands. This one calls it the bulbourethral. Out the penis. Done. So there's path of sperm. There's the function of the seminal fluid and the 3 glands that help make up that seminal fluid. And then we'll finish off with this, hormone regulation. So this is really important in this unit, both for males and females. It just turns out it's simpler in males than it is for females. What we have here, sorry, that's a whole bunch of stuff coming up at once, and we'll go through it slowly. Hormones are really important in the production of sperm, but also in maintaining the correct production rate. Again, the male body has sort of been optimized to produce about 1,500 sperm per second, which is crazy. but we don't want less than that. So we want sort of the factory running at that rate. We also don't want like way more than that, right? That would be pointless. There's a bit more. So what happens here is there is some hormones, or there are hormones released. They're constantly being released and monitored by your body. And they sort of feed off of each other to make sure that production rates always stay about the same. You don't want to make too much. You don't want to make too little. You want to be ready to go, but you don't want to have extra sperm. It's like I toured a couple of times, actually. I've toured a Jelly Belly factory in Sacramento, California. And they're the same, right? Like you want to keep production levels steady. You don't want this like shortage of Jelly Bellies, because then we would all be sad if we didn't have our candy. But you don't want to have like huge stockpiles of Jelly Bellies either, right? So you got to maintain production, and maybe sometimes you got to crank production up if things get busy. Yeah, get it. Or maybe you need to slightly crank things down if things have slowed down. So your body is doing that with this hormone regulation. So here we go. And we're going to see that it's actually similar for females, just with a different hormone. So that will help you memorize all of this. The hypothalamus is the structure in your brain. It's kind of in your brain stem towards the back of your brain that secretes something called gonadotropin releasing hormones, which we shorten into GnRH. So gonadotropin means to do with your gonads, the sex hormones. So it starts the whole process by releasing gonadotropin releasing hormones. Those hormones travel to the anterior pituitary gland, which is also in your brain. And then the anterior pituitary gland is going to itself produce two separate hormones. Should be pretty straightforward. I think that the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, which causes the release of gonadotropic hormones, right, from the anterior pituitary. Those two gonadotropic hormones, you don't even really need to know that term, but you do need to know these sort of peachy colored names. They're important. So the anterior pituitary releases follicle stimulating hormone, and that is the hormone, we shorten it to FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. That promotes sperm production, which, remember, happens in the seminiferous tubules of the testicles. The anterior pituitary is also going to produce something called luteinizing hormone, LH for short. So luteinizing hormone, which is going to stimulate the production of testosterone, which is the male sex hormone. And that's produced by something called the interstitial cells in the testes. And I'll show you in the next slide, there's a picture of those. Now, in terms of knowing that FSH makes sperm and luteinizing hormone makes testosterone, I always remember this. This seems to work for me. FSH in my brain says fresh sperm here. My dad has just walked into the room and he is now laughing at this little analogy. FSH, fresh sperm here. And that means then that the LH, it's producing testosterone. Hold on, I'm going to pause this for a second and chat with my pops here. I'll be back in a moment. All right, we're back. My father was going to make some inappropriate comments, so I'm glad he didn't. So we have hypothalamus secreting GnRH, which stimulates the anterior pituitary to make FSH, fresh sperm here, that's going to produce or stimulate sperm production, and luteinizing hormone, which is going to stimulate testosterone production in the interstitial cells in the testes. Here's a picture that shows you the seminiferous tubules themselves, are these large round structures. And then the interstitial cells, that actually just means in between, they're these little triangular cells in between the large seminiferous tubules. So these are the tubes in cross section, and then these small little cells in the sort of corners, if we want to call it that. I know they're round, but these little triangular sort of corner cells are the interstitial cells making testosterone. Testosterone itself is the male sort of reproductive hormone. It is a steroid, which means it's just lipid-based. It is made in the, remember, lipids made in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. And it is the thing that creates and maintains this little 2 means secondary sex characteristics for males. Those characteristics are a deeper voice. So these are things that like males would experience around puberty, right? Deeper voice, body and facial hair, muscle development, oils, which is one of the things that can result in acne, and sweat, which is one of the things that can make men stinky. So if you sort of look at those secondary sex characteristics, we have hairy, sweaty, stinky beasts is basically what the testosterone does. And the females are watching going, oh, he is exactly right. And the guys are going, hey, come on now. But those are the secondary sex characteristics that are brought about by testosterone levels, which we want to keep in check as well, right? We don't want too much or too little of any of these things. So we talked about that hormone regulation piece. We want to regulate not only the rate of sperm production, but we also want to regulate how much testosterone is produced, because there's a sweet spot for the body. So in order to do that, we get these things called hormone feedback loops. So these are negative feedback loops, where as one thing is produced and it starts to build up, it actually sort of turns the system down a little bit. So I'm going to walk you through. Here's just a picture I had found online. It's a little bit confusing. Here's one that looks a little bit nicer. So this is the negative feedback loop in the male reproductive system. And maybe I should title it that. This is our last slide of learning, don't worry. Negative feedback loop. So here's what happens. Remember we said the hypothalamus produces gonadotropic releasing hormone, which stimulates the anterior pituitary with FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, to turn on sperm production in the seminiferous tubules. And with luteinizing hormone, hopefully you can see my little cursor here, luteinizing hormone is going to turn on testosterone production in the interstitial cells. Now, as the seminiferous tubules start cranking out tons of sperm, they actually make another molecule called inhibin. And as inhibin starts to build up, it travels to the anterior pituitary gland and regulates the amount of FSH that's produced. And the interstitial cells, they're cranking out testosterone, which travel up to the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus and turn their productions down. So it turns down the production of GnRH and the production of LH. So here's kind of the analogy. When the hypothalamus produces GnRH and turns on the anterior pituitary to start making LH and FSH, that's like turning on a stereo and cranking up the volume, right? So you're like turning the volume up, turning the volume up, turning the volume up, and then at some point you reach the level where it just works for you, right? Where you want to stop there. And you have to somehow have some ability to like moderate that volume level. So the inhibin and the testosterone in this negative feedback loop, it's almost like the volume's getting turned up, 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 up. And then there's like a little monitoring system that goes, okay, the volume's getting loud enough now. And as the volume starts to increase, it's monitoring that, and eventually somebody says, no, let's wind it back a little bit. That might be too much. That's the role of inhibin and testosterone. So we build them up to sort of an acceptable level, and then once it starts to sort of go past that level, they actually start turning things down. They turn down the volume. So they tell the hypothalamus, hey, slow down. Don't turn off, but slow down the production of GnRH. And hey, anterior pituitary, slow down the production of FSH and LH. And the whole point of this negative feedback loop is it's just maintenance. Right? We want to maintain sperm production and testosterone production. We want to maintain those at a healthy and acceptable level. One of the kind of crazy things, I'll throw this in here just at the end, is sometimes males will take synthetic testosterone. It's a steroid, right? And they take synthetic testosterone in order to help that muscle development piece. That's the part of it that most guys are looking for who are using steroids with testosterone to build muscle. What ends up happening, though, you have to be a little bit careful if you're going to take extra testosterone. Because if you add a whole bunch of extra testosterone into your body, what you're doing is you're amplifying the negative feedback piece. Right? So that extra testosterone boosts this part of this negative feedback cycle. And if you're boosting the negative feedback, you're telling the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, hey, stop making FSH and stop making LH. So by taking synthetic testosterone, you're boosting the turning down of the volume. So your FSH and your LH go way down. And when FSH goes way down, so does sperm production. So one of the issues, and so does testosterone production, which means you got to keep buying it and injecting it, right? You got to keep adding it to build that muscle. So one of the problems with taking steroids like testosterone is you actually can end up with impotence, the inability to produce the correct number of sperm because you've jacked up the turn things down section of this feedback loop, which is going to turn the LH and FSH production off. So just putting that out there for guys, if you're going to try to go get big muscles, right? You want to get jacked, you want to get all swole, be a little bit cautious when you go to take synthetic, or if you decide to take synthetic testosterone, because you could be sort of hurting your chances of having a family if that's a long-term goal, if you start turning off the sperm production in your seminiferous tubules. So there is lesson number 1. Lots going on there, a bit longer than I thought it was going to be, sorry. If you have questions, please fire me an email or join me on Zoom. I'd love to see a few more of you a little more often on Zoom. That would be great. There is, in the homework section, some labeling to do, I believe, and you can start on the reproduction package. You can start looking at just the male stuff for now out of that reproduction assignment. So I hope to see you very soon on Zoom or check in with you via email. Have fun learning about reproductive system.